Hi, this is Eric Keller for Otoy. In this video, we're going to be looking at a brand new feature in Octane for Maya that allows us to easily work with and render VDB data. So we can create things like simulations of fire and smoke, just as I'm doing in this sort of simple volcano eruption scene. So here's the scene in Maya 2016, and it's pretty simple. I've got my geometry for my volcano. I've got a deformed plane to represent the ocean. I'm using the sun and sky node for lighting. And here is my volume. This is the actual plume of smoke and steam that's coming out of the volcano. So VDB data is a generic format that allows you to move volumetric data between 3D applications, including animated data. So this is actually an animated sequence of VDBs. Now, Octane has had the ability to render VDB data easily since version 3 came out. However, with Maya, in order to bring the VDB data into the scene, you needed to use a third-party plugin or a script, and some of them were hard to find and not easy to use. In this latest version of Octane, Otoy has given you the ability to import the VDB data directly into Maya without the need for another plugin. You can do it all from within Octane for Maya. And you can see on the Octane menu here, we now have Octane VDB, which allows you to bring in the volume data. So let's take a closer look at how we can work with this to create this volcano effect. So the VDB format itself was created by an independent group of developers. And if you want to learn more about the format itself, you can go to openvdb.org. So how do you get a VDB? Well, the easiest way to get a VDB file is to go to openvdb.org and go to the download section. And if you scroll down, you'll see that there are a number of free example scenes that you can easily download and start working with right away, including some nice explosions with fire and smoke and that kind of stuff. And of course, the files that I created for this project, you can download and work with as well. So to generate this smoke and fire, this fiery eruption that you see here, I actually used Houdini. And believe it or not, it's not that hard to do. And I'm by no means a Houdini expert. So I'm going to take you very quickly through that process of creating a VDB and exporting it as a sequence from Houdini, just so you get a little bit of a sense of how to work with this file format. So to create the effect in Houdini and export it as a VDB sequence, what I did is I brought in my volcano geometry using File, Import, brought in the geometry, and that gives me a nice place for position and scale reference. Then I created a tube object by clicking on this button here on the shelf, and I placed that tube within the caldera of the volcano and kind of scaled it down so that it would fit neatly within there. And then with the tube object selected, I went up to the shelf, the Pyro Effects shelf, and up here there are a number of presets that you can use for quickly generating effects. Luckily for me, there happens to be a volcano preset. So with the tube selected, I clicked on the volcano preset, and it added a number of nodes to the scene to automatically generate that volcano effect using the tube object as a source. So when I play the scene, you can actually see I have this animated explosion coming out of the volcano. So to actually export the VDB sequence from Houdini, I need to go to Pyro Import. And within this node, you'll see Import Pyro Fields and Import Pyro Visualization. I'm mostly concerned with the Import Pyro Fields node. What I need to do is I need to connect a converter to this node. So if I pull up the tab menu and type in Convert, I can find Convert VDB right here. Click on it to add the node, and then add the input right here. And then to this node, I need to attach a file node. All right, so this is just a duplicate of what I've already done here. So the file node tells Houdini where to put the VDB sequence and what to include in it. So if I take a look at the convert node, I need to set the convert to menu to VDB because that's what I want to output. And this will add a few more options right here, which I can leave these at the default. And then I want to tell Houdini what I want to include as part of the VDB sequence. And to do that, I can use this menu right here, and you can see here are some of the options that are included in the simulation. So I'm going to keep things simple, and I'm just going to choose density and temperature. And once I have that set up, I'll go down to the file node. I'm going to set the file mode to write so that it writes the files to disk, and then open up the file browser to choose where I want to put the sequence. So the sequence itself, I'm going to give the name plume.$f. This tells Houdini that I want to export a file sequence as opposed to the current frame. Then the file format is going to be VDB. And then to choose the number of frames that I'm going to do, all I need to do is play through the simulation. So I set my timeline to 70 frames because I felt like that was enough. And then all I need to do with the file node selected is rewind and play the scene from the beginning. And as it plays the scene, it's going to write the VDB files to disk. And that's all I need to do to export the VDB sequence from Houdini. So after playing through the scene, Houdini has written the files to disk. I've placed the files in a subfolder of my Maya project. So the Maya project is Otoy Volcano Maya. In the scenes folder, I created another folder called VDB sequence. And in here, you can see here is the actual sequence, frames 1 through 70 of the VDB simulation. So now let's take a look at how we can import that VDB sequence into Maya. And for this, you'll need to be using the very latest version of the Octane for Maya plugin. So if I go to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager, and scroll down, you can see here's Octane plugin. I'm going to click on the I button for info. And for this video, I'm using the plugin version 3.06.2-11.5. So make sure you have at least that version loaded. And what I'm going to do is let's turn off the visibility of polygons. So to add the VDB sequence to the scene, you need to go to this new Octane menu that they've just placed here at the top of Maya. And you can see here is a way to create all of our favorite Octane nodes. We also have Octane VDB. So if I click on that, it is going to add a new transform. So I have a new transform called Octane Volume 2 Transform. And if I go into the attribute editor for the volume transform, you can see here are my options. If I click on this folder here, I can navigate to the scenes folder and that VDB sequence folder and select one of these to load the VDB. So if I select that one, it is going to load the new VDB into the scene. Okay, there it is. And it comes in right at the same position where it was when I exported it from Houdini. So if I turn on polygons, you can see it's right there placed over the volcano. Of course, right now it just looks like a box. And of course, if I scrub on the timeline, the box remains the same size, and that's because currently I'm just using this single VDB file. So this is plume.70.vdb. So I want to use an animated sequence, so I'll just go down here to the bottom and turn on Use File Sequence. And now notice that when I scrub in the scene, that box adjusts in size based on the animation. So now let's take a look at that original plume that I set up and see what settings I used to create that kind of fiery explosion effect. So I spent a few minutes adjusting the scene. I brought in some higher res volcano geometry, but the VDB is still exactly where it was before. And now I can get into the fun bit of designing the look of the cloud coming out of the volcano here. So to do this, I'm going to select my VDB node here in the scene, and I'm going to attach a volume medium. So to do that, I'll go into the attribute editor, and next to medium, I'm going to click on the checker box to bring open the Create Render Node window, and then I'll choose Octane Volume Medium. So all the settings that you see here are going to adjust the look of the cloud. Let's start with the scale. I'm going to set the scale down to 1. And you can see immediately we start to see a little bit more through the cloud. Looks a little bit less dense. If I bring this down to 0.1, you can see it starts to change the look quite a bit. So I'm going to set the scale back to 1 here. And then I'm going to adjust the absorption and the scattering. These sliders determine how the light interacts with the medium as it passes through the medium, whether it's absorbed by the medium or if it's bouncing around within it, or a little bit of both. So if I start to adjust the absorption, I'm going to bring this way up here. And I'm also going to bring up the scattering. You'll see that immediately we start to get a big difference. We have this nice backlighting right here, and then the lighting passing off the clouds, as well as some self-shadowing effects. It looks much more realistic. The next setting I want to adjust is the phase. Setting the phase to a positive value is going to give you more of a forward scattering effect. Setting it to a negative value is going to give you more of a back scattering effect. So for instance, if I set this up to like 0.8, we'll see that it gets much darker in the shadowed areas of the medium. We also see quite a bit more detail. If I set this to say 0.1, we'll see that the shadow parts get quite a bit lighter. If I set this to, let's say, minus 0.8, you can see we get more forward scattering, so we get even less self-shadowing, or it's less pronounced. And now if I want to adjust kind of the amount of detail within the medium, I can adjust the volume step length slider. So if I set this to a high value, it's going to reduce the amount of detail in the volume. So if I set this to say something like 20, you can see the light passes through it a bit more easily, and there's less detail overall. Let's set the phase here to 0.8, and you get something that's kind of looks a bit more like steam. And then if I set the volume step length to a low value, let's say 2, we get more detail and looks a little bit denser or thicker. So you can see how these sliders can be used even with the same VDB file to create a wide variety of looks to your volume medium. So bear in mind that the render kernel that you're using with Octane is going to affect the look of the cloud. Right now I'm using the PMC render kernel, which is the most expensive but also creates the most realistic lighting and effects. If I go into direct light, you can see that it'll be a lot faster, but the cloud itself looks very different. So I'm back to rendering with the PMC render kernel here. I've made a few adjustments to my cloud to make it look a bit more like black smoke and less like steam. What I like to do now is add kind of a glowing effect coming from within the volcano itself. And to do this, I'm going to add an emission ramp to the volume medium. The first thing I want to do is go back up to the top level, the Octane volume node, and for my emission ID, I've set this to temperature. So this is one of the attributes that was exported with the VDB sequence from Houdini. And then I'm going to go into the medium node, and down under emission, I'll click on this checker box to bring up the create render node window, and I'm going to add Octane texture emission. So the next thing I'm going to do is lower the power, because as you can see this is a bit too bright. So let's bring this down to 1. And for the moment I'm going to leave efficiency or texture at just a simple volume. So this right now would be 0 would be black and 1 would be white. So this is actually the efficiency or texture right now is kind of a dark gray. But let's go back to the volume medium node, and now I'm going to go down to emission ramp and click on the checker box next to this. Bring up our create render node window, and I'm going to add an Octane volume gradient. You can also add this gradient to the absorption or scattering ramp options. But whenever working with a volume, you want to use the volume gradient node. So let's click on this and then go into its attributes. And you can see immediately it's already kind of affecting the volume in a very interesting way. So let's add some colors to this so we can kind of tune it a little bit. I'm going to press the add new item button twice to add 2 colors to the gradient. So I'm going to set the position of this color to 1. And then I'll click on the RGB color option and add this dark red color. So now you can see I have kind of this reddish color coming up from the bottom of the volume. But it's going a little bit too far into the volume. So I'm going to go to the position of this black color. I'm going to set the position of the black color to like 0.95 so that I just have a very narrow band. And that will force this red color down into the volcano a little bit more. And then what I might do is let's add one more new item. Let's set this RGB color to maybe a super dark orange. Something like that. this position up a little bit. So kind of making the gradient a little bit more narrow. And then let's go back to the emission. I'm going to add an RGB spectrum node to this emission or texture value. So click on the checker box and let's choose RGB spectrum, and let's set this to a dark red. I kind of want to make this fairly subtle. I don't want it to be overpowering. That's starting to look a little bit better. And from this point I can just start to tune these attributes until I get the look that I'm going for. So if I set the power down to 0.5, that should dim it quite a bit. And it looks a little bit more subtle. And that's the basics of working with VDB files within Maya. It's a great new feature that makes creating cool explosive effects and smoke and that kind of thing a lot easier. So we're going to revisit this project in the future and see if we can add some more exciting elements, such as hot magma spewing out of the top of the volcano. But I think right now we have a pretty good start.